Ma'am, step over here. I need your ID right now.
I'm waiting for my sister's train. Tell me what crime you suspect, or I'm not consenting to this stop.
You've been reported as suspicious. That's enough. Hand it over.
It's not enough under Terry. If you detain me without reasonable suspicion, you're about to make this the most expensive mistake.
The officer's hand was already resting on his service weapon before he'd even said a word. He didn't know it yet, but the woman he was about to confront had written the literal book on the Fourth Amendment, a textbook used in law schools across the country. She had argued before the Illinois Supreme Court advised senators on judicial nominations and spent 30 years teaching the brightest legal minds in the nation how to dismantle flimsy police stops, just like this one. The woman standing under the grand departures board wasn't lost. She wasn't casing the station. She wasn't a threat. She was Professor Eleanor Vance, and she was about to give a young, overzealous police officer the most expensive constitutional law lesson of his life. Before we get into the explosive details of this confrontation, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story is a masterclass in what happens when unchecked authority meets immovable expertise, and you won't want to miss a single second. Also, drop a comment right now and tell me, have you ever felt like you were being watched or judged unfairly in a public place? I want to hear about it. Eleanor Vance was a creature of habit and precision. At 58, she was a tenured professor at the University of Chicago Law School, a titan in her field. She believed in the power of the law, the sanctity of the Constitution, and the importance of civil discourse. That Tuesday morning, she was doing something utterly mundane, waiting for her sister's train to arrive from Milwaukee. She was standing in the Great Hall of Chicago's Union Station, a place she'd been 1,000 times before. Dressed in a simple but elegant pantsuit, she was calmly reading the departure and arrival boards, cross-referencing the times with a text message from her sister. She was a picture of tranquil patience. That's when she felt the eyes on her. It started as a prickle on the back of her neck. A few feet away, a newsstand vendor was staring, talking quietly into his phone. Eleanor paid him no mind. A few minutes later, she heard the heavy, purposeful steps approaching from behind. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me." Eleanor turned slowly. The voice was young, tight, with a nervous energy that tried to pass itself off as authority. Officer Rob Miller was 27 years old, 3 years on the force, and he was responding to a suspicious person call. The dispatch was hopelessly vague. A black woman standing alone looking around for an extended period. No crime reported, no threatening behavior described, just a woman existing in a public space. But in Miller's mind, that was enough. He saw Eleanor well-dressed and calm, and his internal bias clicked into place. She didn't fit his picture of who belonged in this station at this time of day. Eleanor kept her voice even, her hands loosely at her sides. "Excuse me, officer. Is there some sort of problem? I'm the one asking the questions here," Miller said, puffing his chest out slightly. "You've been reported for suspicious behavior. I need to see some identification." Eleanor's mind, a finely tuned legal instrument, immediately began assessing the situation. This was a classic non-consensual police encounter, a seizure under the Fourth Amendment, and it required a specific legal justification that Miller, she suspected, did not have. She had two choices: comply and challenge it later, or stand her ground and assert her rights. She had spent a lifetime teaching her students to do the latter. It was time to practice what she preached. "Officer." She began, her tone shifting from casual to pedagogical under Terry versus Ohio. "You need to have a reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime in order to detain me. Could you please articulate that suspicion for me now?" Officer Miller blinked. He was used to mumbled excuses or panicked compliance, not a calm, direct citation of Supreme Court precedent. The question caught him completely off guard, and his defensive posture hardened into outright hostility. He saw her question not as a request for legal justification, but as a challenge to his authority. And in front of the dozens of commuters now slowing their pace to watch the unfolding scene, he felt he couldn't afford to back down. "Ma'am, someone reported you. That's all the suspicion I need." He snapped, his voice rising. "You're being evasive. Now show me your ID." Professor Vance held his gaze. "With all due respect, officer, that's incorrect." An uncorroborated tip without any specific details of criminal activity does not meet the standard for reasonable suspicion. Was I described as attempting to open luggage that wasn't mine? Was I seen passing a suspicious package? Or was I simply, as I have been standing here reading the train schedule? Each question was a precise surgical strike against his flawed legal premise. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't resisting. She was dismantling his entire reason for stopping her one legal principle at a time. The small crowd of onlookers was growing, and a few people had already pulled out their phones, sensing this was more than a routine interaction. Miller's face was turning a blotchy red. He was losing control of the encounter, and he knew it. "You're interfering with a police investigation," he said, his hand moving from his belt to rest on the grip of his sidearm. It was a classic escalation tactic designed to intimidate. "What investigation precisely?" Eleanor asked, her voice still unwavering. "An investigation into a woman waiting for her sister's train, officer. I am not interfering. I am asking for the legal basis of this stop, which is my constitutional right." She saw the corner he had backed himself into. He had no legal ground to stand on, and instead of de-escalating, he was digging his hole deeper. This was no longer about a suspicious person report. It was about his ego. He had initiated a stop in public, and now he felt he had to win it. Professor Vance realized the situation was becoming dangerous. Arguing constitutional law with an agitated armed officer in a crowded train station was a losing proposition regardless of who was right. She decided to change her approach. She would comply, but on her own terms, creating a crystal-clear record of the encounter. "Officer, I'm going to comply with your request for identification," she said slowly and clearly, for the benefit of both him and the onlookers now recording the scene. "But let the record show that I am doing so under protest, as this detention is unlawful and lacks the required reasonable suspicion." She reached deliberately into her purse, keeping her hand in full view, and pulled out a slim leather wallet. From it, she produced 2 cards. The first was her Illinois driver's license. The second was her university faculty identification. She handed them both to Officer Miller. He snatched the cards from her hand and looked at the driver's license first. Eleanor Vance. The address was in Hyde Park, near the university. Then he looked at the second card. The bold crimson logo of the University of Chicago was at the top. Below her picture, the text was printed in clear, unambiguous letters: Eleanor Vance, Professor of Constitutional Law. The world seemed to hang suspended for a moment. This should have been the instant the officer realized the colossal mistake he was making. This should have been the moment he handed the IDs back with a sheepish apology and walked away. But Rob Miller's pride was too wounded. He didn't see a respected legal scholar. He saw a smart-mouthed woman he believed was mocking him. He thought the ID was a prop, a clever fake designed to make him look stupid. His lips curled into a sneer. "A law professor? You think I'm going to fall for that? This is a fake ID. A good one. I'll give you that, but it's fake." Eleanor stared at him, a flicker of disbelief crossing her calm features. "Officer, that is my official university-issued faculty identification. You can call the university's main number right now and they will verify my employment and my title. I assure you it is quite real." "Yeah, I'm sure they will." Miller scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're just trying to get out of this." He was so committed to his initial assumption that he was now incapable of processing new information that contradicted it. To him, she was a suspect, and this elaborate professor story was just part of her act. He saw her composure not as a sign of innocence, but as the calculated coolness of a seasoned criminal. The crowd was murmuring now, the injustice of the situation becoming plain to everyone watching. The phones recording the scene were held up higher, more steadily. The confrontation had reached its breaking point. Miller was trapped by his own escalating series of bad decisions. He had made a bad stop, ignored her correct legal challenges, and now had publicly accused her of carrying a fake ID. There was no graceful exit for him, so he chose the worst possible path forward: brute force. "That's it. You're being uncooperative and providing false identification," he declared, his voice loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "Turn around. Place your hands behind your back. You're under arrest." A collective gasp went through the crowd. For what Eleanor asked, her voice laced with a weary incredulity. For interfering with a police investigation and obstructing justice. The absurdity of the charge was breathtaking. There was no justice to obstruct because there had been no crime to investigate. There was only an officer who had racially profiled a woman and was now arresting her for having the audacity to know her rights. Eleanor knew this was the moment that would change everything. The video was rolling. Her identity was verifiable, and this arrest was a legal time bomb. She turned around slowly, a profound sense of disappointment washing over her. She held her hands out behind her back. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. The sound echoed slightly in the cavernous hall. A young man standing nearby, who had been filming the entire exchange, spoke up loudly. "I got it all on video, officer." Every word. Miller shot him a venomous glare, but said nothing. He grabbed Eleanor's arm a little more forcefully than necessary and began marching her through the stunned crowd toward the station exit. She didn't struggle. She didn't shout. She walked with the quiet dignity of a woman who knew she was on the right side of the law even as it was being used against her. She was no longer just a law professor. She was about to become Exhibit A in a federal lawsuit that would rock the city and end a young officer's career before it had barely begun. Do you think the bystander filming was brave or just doing what anyone should do? Let me know in the comments. The back of the patrol car was stifling and smelled of antiseptic cleaner. As they drove the short distance to the 1st District station, Officer Miller was silent, his jaw clenched. He was likely replaying the encounter in his head, but not with regret, with a self-righteous anger. He had been challenged, and he had won. Or so he thought. Professor Vance sat perfectly still, her mind a whirlwind of legal strategy. She was already outlining the complaint, identifying the specific constitutional violations, and preserving the chain of evidence. The humiliation of the arrest was secondary to the clarity of the legal battle to come. When they arrived at the precinct, Miller led her to the processing desk. The officer on duty was Sergeant Eva Rostova, a 20-year veteran with tired eyes that had seen it all. She looked at the well-dressed, composed black woman in handcuffs, and then at the flushed, agitated young officer beside her. An alarm bell of experience went off in her head. This didn't look right. "What have we got?" "Miller Rostova," asked her voice, a low, gravelly monotone. "Arrested for obstruction and providing a fake ID," Miller announced, placing Eleanor's wallet on the counter. Rostova picked up the wallet and began cataloging its contents. Driver's license, a few credit cards, some cash, and the university ID. She held it under the desk lamp. Unlike Miller, Rostova had spent 2 decades handling documents of all kinds. She recognized the weight of the cardstock, the crispness of the printing, the embedded holographic seal. This wasn't fake, not even close. She looked from the photo on the ID to the woman standing before her. Then she read the title again. Professor of Constitutional Law. A slow, cold dread began to creep into Rostova's stomach. She looked at Miller. "Where did you arrest her Union Station?" "Got a call about a suspicious person." "And what was she doing that was suspicious?" Rostova pressed her eyes, narrowing. "She was loitering, looking around. When I questioned her, she got belligerent. Miller said defensively, "She gave you this ID and you thought it was fake. Look at it. Who carries around an ID that says they're a law professor?" "She was trying to play me," he insisted. Rostova sighed a long, weary sound. She had seen this before, a young officer letting his ego write checks his authority couldn't cash. She placed the ID card down on the desk, separating it from the other items. She knew this arrest was a grenade with the pin already pulled. Her only job now was to try and mitigate the explosion. She picked up her desk phone and bypassed the normal chain of command. She dialed the extension for the watch commander's office. "Captain Davis," she said, keeping her voice low. "You need to come down to booking, right now." Captain Marcus Davis was a man who hated surprises. With 25 years on the force, he was just counting down the days to his pension. When he walked into the booking area and saw Sergeant Rostova's grim expression, he knew his afternoon was ruined. Rostova wordlessly handed him the university ID. Davis read it, then looked over at Professor Vance, who was sitting in a holding chair with a preternatural calm. He looked back at the ID, then at a fuming Officer Miller. It took him less than 10 seconds to understand the catastrophe that had just walked through his station doors. He pulled Miller aside, his voice a furious whisper. "What the hell were you thinking? Did you run her name? Did you even try to verify this cap? She was being a smart aleck quoting court cases?" Miller stammered. "Because she teaches them," Davis hissed. "You just arrested one of the top legal scholars in the state for waiting for a train." He walked back to his office, ran Eleanor Vance's name through the system. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. He then did what Miller should have done 2 hours earlier. He Googled her name. The first result was her faculty page at the University of Chicago, complete with the same photo on the ID card, a list of published works, and a lengthy, distinguished biography. Davis felt a wave of nausea. He walked back out to the processing area. "Uncuff her," he ordered Rostova. "Immediately." He then turned to Professor Vance, his face a mask of professional regret. "Professor Vance, on behalf of the Chicago Police Department, I want to offer my sincerest apologies for this misunderstanding. You are free to go. All charges are being dropped." Eleanor stood up, rubbing her wrists where the cuffs had been. Her calm demeanor was now gone, replaced by a cold, controlled anger. "It's a bit late for apologies, Captain. This was no misunderstanding. This was an unlawful arrest." "Ma'am, it was a mistake." "A mistake is a typo. Captain," she cut in her voice sharp as steel, "this was a flagrant violation of my 4th and 14th Amendment rights. I want a copy of the initial dispatch call, the incident report, Officer Miller's body camera footage, and any and all surveillance footage from the station. I want them tonight." Davis nodded numbly. "I'll have them prepared for you." "Good," she said, picking up her wallet from the counter. "Because you're going to need a copy for your city's attorneys. They'll be hearing from my legal counsel first thing in the morning." She turned and walked out of the station, not looking back, leaving a stunned silence and the career wreckage of Officer Rob Miller in her wake. The lawsuit landed on the city attorney's desk less than 48 hours later. It was a 30-page document of legal brilliance, detailing every misstep, every constitutional violation with chilling precision. It cited not only the major Supreme Court precedents, but also obscure Seventh Circuit decisions that applied specifically to police conduct in Chicago. It named Officer Miller individually and the city of Chicago as a defendant. The claim was for unlawful seizure, false arrest, and racial profiling. Before the city could even formulate a response, the story exploded. The bystander's video from the train station hit social media and went viral overnight. The headline was "Irresistible Cop Arrests Black Law Professor for Knowing the Law." National news outlets picked it up. The University of Chicago issued a scathing statement in support of their esteemed faculty member. Legal experts appeared on cable news to break down the video, pointing out Miller's every error with academic glee. The Chicago Police Department was facing a public relations nightmare. The internal affairs investigation was swift and brutal. They reviewed Miller's Bodycam footage, which was even more damning than the bystander's video. It captured his escalating agitation and his sneering dismissal of Professor Vance's credentials. They pulled his records. A clear pattern emerged. In his 3 years on the force, Officer Miller had a complaint history for aggressive stops that was 4 times the department average. His stops of minority citizens were disproportionately high, even for his patrol area. He was a lawsuit waiting to happen, and Professor Vance had just called in the debt. The city's attorneys watched the videos, read the internal affairs summary, and called an emergency meeting. Their conclusion was blunt: the case was indefensible. There was no plausible legal theory under which Miller's actions could be justified. He had detained a citizen without reasonable suspicion, arrested her without probable cause, and had done so based on what appeared to be obvious racial bias. They had 2 choices: go to court and lose spectacularly in a public trial, or settle quickly and quietly. They chose to settle. But the consequences were only just beginning. What do you think is a fair punishment for an officer like Miller? Termination, or something more? Share your thoughts below. Officer Rob Miller was fired 6 weeks after the arrest. The termination letter cited gross misconduct violations of departmental policy and actions that brought the department into disrepute. His police union filed a grievance but quietly dropped it after their own lawyers reviewed the evidence. They knew a losing battle when they saw one. Miller's career in law enforcement was over, for cause making him virtually unhireable by any other reputable department in the country. The city settled Professor Vance's lawsuit for a sum that was confidentially sealed, but inside sources leaked to the press that the figure was just over $850,000. In a press conference held on the steps of the law school, Professor Vance announced that every single penny of the settlement would be used to endow a new legal aid clinic at the university. The clinic's mission would be to represent pro bono citizens who had experienced civil rights violations at the hands of law enforcement. "I had the knowledge and the resources to fight this," she told the assembled reporters. "This money will now go to defending those who do not. My personal injury has been transformed into a public good." But the fallout didn't stop there. Spurred by the public outcry and the high-profile nature of the case, the Department of Justice launched a pattern or practice investigation into the Chicago Police Department. The investigation, which took nearly a year, uncovered systemic issues with training, supervision, and accountability, particularly concerning racially biased stops. The final result was a federally mandated consent decree, a comprehensive reform agreement overseen by a federal judge. The decree forced sweeping changes, mandatory implicit bias, training a robust early warning system to flag officers like Miller, strengthened civilian oversight, and strict data collection on all police stops to monitor for racial disparities. One unlawful arrest in a train station had become the catalyst for the most significant police reforms the city had seen in a generation. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a bad cop and a brilliant professor. It was a story about systems. The system of bias that caused a vendor and then an officer to see a threat where there was only a woman waiting for a train. And the legal system that, when pushed by someone with the knowledge and resolve to use it, can provide a powerful, if imperfect, form of accountability. Professor Vance never wanted the spotlight, and she returned to her classroom as soon as she could, continuing to shape the next generation of lawyers. Her greatest lesson was not delivered in a lecture hall, but in the echoing Great Hall of Union Station. It taught us that knowing your rights is a form of power, and that sometimes the most profound changes begin with one person standing calmly in the face of injustice, refusing to be moved. What does true accountability look like to you? Was the financial settlement and the officer's termination enough to bring justice in this case? I truly want to know what you think, so please leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please share it so more people can hear it.